Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you guys are at. I hope you're having a fantastic day. It's SoulSaint here, and we got an exclusive look at Xena, Warrior Princess, who's going to be coming to Raid very, very soon. We're going to do a breakdown on her kit, as well as where she could be viable and useful at for the foreseeable future, and maybe some ways that you can incorporate getting her, as well as like some things to look forward to in the future. But before we go too far into it, I want you guys to take a look at how the character looks. Really big salute to seeing how Raid and Plarium are able to collaborate with Universal and all the people who have any type of influence with Xena. She looks very good. It looks like she's in the Barons. It kind of fits suiting with like Barbarians looks, and it just very on point. You see the chakra on the hip. I mean, this character looks phenomenal. The graphic department does a fantastic job with all the designs of the characters, as well as some assets in the game as well. It's really well done, very well put. The way I understand that this champion is going to be designed towards like arena/Hydra content. So let's do a breakdown on her kit and see why she's so good. All right, so Xena's got a lot of stuff going on that I think is going to be very interesting. So let's start with her kit. I'm going to break down each of the abilities and where I can see some value at, and then from there we're going to kind of talk about like some case uses, and then we'll discuss how we can go about getting her. Okay, so her first A1 ability is going to be Sword of Redemption, which is going to be attack one enemy 2 times. It will ignore 3% of the target's defense for each buff on the target. Will also ignore shield buffs if the target's under 2 or more buffs or debuffs. Okay, so it's going to be able to get booked up for another 20% damage. So this is just basically an ability that not only ignores defense the more they're buffed up, but it also ignores shields, which means they're going straight into the actual HP of a champion. Very strong already. There's not many champions that have to do with like ignore percent already built into their kit. I could think of some Wu's A2. We could talk about Georgian and his passive, for example, and their ability to kind of get what would be closer towards like true damage or damage that doesn't really get negated by defensive stats is really strong, right? She has this laced throughout her entire kit, because as you look into Chakram Cyclone, which is on a 4-turn cooldown, can be booked down to a 3-turn cooldown, attacks all enemies and ignores another 5% of the target's defense for each buff on that target. So it's like even more on top of that, right? Really screaming down towards like, yo, this champion's gonna hit, it's gonna hurt. She also steals 20% of the turn meter from each enemy, because this hits all enemies, remember? This effect cannot be resisted if the target's under 2 or more debuffs or buffs. So you are punishing them by debuffing them, or they're trying to defensively stack themselves up or give themselves an advantage. They're getting punished for it too as well. So, no matter what you got going on, if they have some kind of buff or debuff, if it's more than 2, she automatically gets them, and it can't be resisted. That's a key thing that needs to be played, because you don't have to worry about accuracy or anything to make sure that turn meter reduction is still occurring, right? Now, Whip of Destiny, which is going to be a 5-turn cooldown, bookable down to a 4, attacks all enemies yet again, ignores 10% of the target's defense for each buff on the target yet again, and then it resets the cooldown of this skill if it kills 2 or more enemies. So, as we spoke before, getting a lot of magnified damage into this character across all of her abilities is really good. 2 AoE abilities too is very strong, right? Now, for the greater good, which is her passive, it has a 3-turn cooldown, so we're going to do a breakdown as to why it has a cooldown, but very interesting. Increases this champion's attack by 10% every single time they use an active skill. I'm going to bet this includes the A1, right? It resets each round, but if you're in an arena fight or a PvP fight or fights that have to do with Battle of Attrition, we're going to talk about that later, it goes up and stacks up to 100%. The only like skill reading that I think is anywhere near close to this is going to be something like Haruma, who scales her defense up the longer it goes. I think particularly if you pay attention to her A2, she gets stacks up of defense, and that is what makes her a very strong champion, because she scales up over the course of a fight, and the way that her mitigation is kind of built into the team allows you to be able to go that distance, right? Well, the inverse of that, of being offensive, looks like Xena comes in with a punch, right? Being able to get 100% scaling on her attack over the course of a fight, as long as she's constantly using abilities, sounds very dangerous, right? Also has a 50% chance of randomly changing this champion's weak hits to normal, strong, or critical hits. So no longer having to worry about weak hits or affinity differences. And I don't know if you guys are paying attention, as a barbarian, she's a force attack champion, which is an interesting dynamic, right? Doesn't matter. She still is able to basically get her regular damage in, or a crit hit, or a strong hit on top of that. The chance increases to 100% though when the enemy's under 2 buffs or more, or debuffs for that matter, right? Now, she also has an active ability, and this is the active effect, which may be why there's a cooldown on it. Fills this champion's turn meter by 100% and places a 50% increased attack buff on this champion for 1 turn whenever 8 or more buffs are placed on the enemy in a single turn. So, it speaks volumes. But let's get the aura out of the way, and then I'm going to talk about like all the different scenarios you can end up facing and why she's so strong. Her aura gives an increased ally attack in arena battles by 33%, so it's definitely on the higher side. All ally attack, so she's able to get damage on top of already being a damage-based champion, right? Now, of course, we don't have ideas about where her multipliers are going to be at, so that's going to have some caveats about how much damage she's going to be able to punch out. But being able to ignore percent defense on a target is very, very good. It's one of the more dangerous outlets. That's why you see Lethal, Savage, Cruel, for example, as some of the sets we use when we're dealing with PvP aspects, right? Now, where is this champion going to be good at? Looking at these different abilities, being able to do a lot of output damage just makes her strong. Like, anywhere you need damage is going to be relevant, right? When you're looking at scaling from her passive effect, it's definitely interesting because the longer a fight goes on, the more she's good. So let's think about areas where you have Battle of Attrition. The first two, I think, right off the bat are some of the longest content in the game that you can end up being a participant of, which would be like Hydra, for example, or maybe even Clan Boss. You know, you have to go 50 turns, and during the course of that, she's using at least 50 abilities. If she's going even faster, then she can get even more chances at it. That sounds like a long place to build up a lot of her passive, so to a point where she's packing up punch whenever she's going for a hit, right? Same thing with Hydra. You know, you're fighting multiple heads and you're trying to stay alive as long as you got. And there's some teams that can go the full distance in terms of turn count. You know, injecting her into a team where she can provide that damage and go that distance, and since they don't reset because there's no other rounds going on, it's just that one and done turn or round, you know, because that's how the fights are designed. She's able to get to that 100% and maintain that 100% uptime in terms of her passive very, very well. The same thing is also true for Arena, where you're going to see, you know, you're only going to have that. It's not a round. It's, you know, there's no multiple rounds where you're fighting multiple waves of like enemies. It's just that you and your team versus the enemy team, right? So you'll definitely be able to see that scaling kind of go up if you're able to build around a lot of survivability with her. Now, a lot of this has to do with if the conditional sign of this is that the champions have to have more buffs, you know, at least 2 or more buffs or debuffs as well. So 2 of any of those combinations. If you have 1 debuff and 1 buff, I'm pretty sure it's going to apply that same aspect where it works. Being able to ignore shield's a big factor inside today's metas. You see champions like UDK being used, who is A3 has it. Someone like Necrit, who I love very dearly. Whenever they target him and they hit him, he has the chance to proc a shield, which protects the enemy or the ally that you're protecting with Ally Protect, making them very formidable. Being able to ignore all that and get straight to the health of somebody makes them very, very dangerous. I'll give you another example. Duchess, who's a meta champion right now, her A1 automatically gets a shield. Being able to ignore that and go straight into it could be the last little bit you need to clear out the fight, right? So very, very strong from an A1 standpoint. The A2 and the A3 are a blessing and a curse depending on how you want to look at it. There's a lot of scenarios. Right now, the team to beat normally incorporates something like Mariska and Terrace, which is a very dangerous combo to go against. And if you're hitting Mariska, Terrace kind of triggers, and that could be dangerous, right? So the AoEs have to be handled very carefully and with caution. However, if you think about it, a lot of times these champions like Mariska Terrace are paired with Duchess or paired with Sify, for example, or champions that do buffs. So if we take a look at it, Duchess and Sify, for example, since I talked about them, they both apply at least 2 to 3 buffs per champion on their team. You do that 2 times, 3 times, you know, 2 or 3 buffs times 4 players or 4 champions. That's way over the required marker for being able to have 8 or more buffs for her active effect. So automatically kind of addressing those champions that are automatically meta in today's PvP arena meta is very, very prominent, you know, like Necrit places buffs. He places 3 every single time he's protecting someone with his A3, right? And if he's placing on multiple people, that scales up, right? So like you're able to get a lot of damage to address a lot of these teams. Same thing with UDK. 2 times 4 is 8. You have your passive effect being able to give you what you're looking for, right? So this is a very, very dangerous champion to have to worry about, right? And I won't deny it. I think that this champion is going to have a lot of viability, especially if we can tap into being able to navigate around Affinity. One of the things I face as a problem with my champions that I use for arena nukers is if they so happen to go magic, you know, we love Sun Wukong around here. So Sun Wukong or Ragash, who are both spirit champions, are some of my favorite champions that I use right now. Shout out to my Skinwalker faction. They typically have trouble dealing with weak hitting someone like an Elva, for example, which does get brought out against my team, and that battle of attrition can sometimes lead to the enemy having a little bit more, you know, favorable outcome, right? So by eliminating the prospect of having a weak hit getting changed into a normal, strong, or even a critical hit at that point just makes her almost like a one-size-fits-all. Now, mind you, you know, you're not going to be able to get the most value out of her if you're going against teams that only have one buff that's being applied across the team. You need to make sure you're having it. But this is how you sway it. If you find a combination of champions that allow you to set up for someone like Xena, give an example, Madame Ceres, who's a void epic that you can use, who strips the enemy of all their buffs, but still places 2 debuffs on it. That still allows the 2 debuff proc that you're looking for all of these abilities, right? Now, you might have a little bit of an issue with the active effect taken into effect, but normally by that point, you already got that triggered because they were buffing up on their team if that was the case, right? Unless you're going first, you know, that's always an option. But this champion screams definitely PvP for sure. I definitely could see some case scenarios where you're able to get some value out of, you know, being able to just do raw damage to something like Hydra because you're able to scale the passive over time. But I really do think that this is an interesting dynamic that's going to allow players to really emphasize being a matchup-friendly nuker and someone that can not only do a lot of true damage to your team, to your enemy's team, but also has some effects where they're able to boost up and inject themselves into some fights, right? So, like, for example, the active effect, it is something I would caution a lot of players because you may see some champions that benefit from turn meter manipulation, such as Tormund. You know, if she gets her turn meter filled and gets a buff, those are 2 triggers that can involve maybe him getting that freeze onto Xena or to someone else. You know, as that turn meter manipulation is happening, that could be a problem, right? Where she loses her turn instead of gaining it, right? And it's a complete waste. So that could be a matchup that's not favorable for her. Or, for example, Valkyrie, where, you know, the more you're getting buffs or the more you're triggering her passive, she's able to inject herself into some of the fights a little bit more effectively. You don't want your enemy team to have turns if possible. You want to lock them down, keep them from being able to be successful, and then, you know, get a victory for yourself as well, right? So something very, very careful to be around when you're playing with her. But I do think that this champion screams that they're going to be a powerhouse in terms of damage, right? Let me know what you guys think. How do you guys feel? Is there any compositions that you would like to see this champion thrive in? I was actually just talking about Necro not so long ago, and I think that this will be a great contribution. Now, I will say this. Most legendary attack-type champions are going to be fairly squishy, so we expect that maybe her stats are going to be lined up towards being able to pack a punch, but being more like a glass cannon. We'll have to see as the stat breakdown comes out and you know, their multipliers and see how much she can really throw down with. But as of right now, I won't deny that it looks very, very promising. And let's talk about how you're going to be able to acquire her. So we're in the Bastion, and we're talking about where you can get Xena Princess Warrior, right? So Xena is going to be available in a Champion Pass. This is something fairly new that I have not been exposed to myself. I'm not sure if there's any previous experiences where Raid or Plarium has introduced characters or put characters via a Champion Pass event. So this may be the first. If not, then y'all let me know in the comments below. But as far as I'm aware, this is the first time we're having an experience where you're going to be able to acquire. So very similar. If you haven't paid attention to the most recent update, they do have a pass, or passes, and it no longer says Forge Pass or Forge or the Battle Pass or anything like that. They now have passes where you're going to be able to see Xena Warrior Princess get into the game, and it's going to be very similar to the Forge Pass, which is how it was announced. It's going to be very comparable, right? Where you're going to have the free-to-play version of the pass, as well as a elite edition of or elite version of this, and of course you're going to buy and purchase a more elite plus version where you're going to get extra levels on top of that so that you don't have to worry about it, you just have it immediately, which is definitely up to you if that's your preference. Maybe you don't have time, whatever the case may be, but you're going to be able to do challenges, rewards, and you're going to be able to go up to, I think, around like 25-ish levels of you know, progression in terms of this pass. And at the end of it, if you've gotten the Elite Pass, which is the secondary one, not the free one, you're going to be able to acquire your hands on Xena Princess Warrior herself. As well as, if you don't, even if you don't have the means to being able to get the pass, you can technically still earn quite a decent bit. I believe the last reward you're going to be able to get for the free-to-play path is going to be a Sacred Shard, which is still valuable. And speaking of Sacred Shards, there's going to be a way that you're going to be able to acquire her as well on top of that, which is going to be through 10x boosts and 10x chances that are going to be coming up. As of right now, the way I remember it, or the way I am looking at it in terms of information, is that we're going to be able to access a 10x summon event chance for her, which is going to be based off of a schedule with events that are going to be tethered towards it. So it's going to be on November 13th, November 20th, and November 30th on different time frames and where you're going to be able to acquire. This is the only time, so it's going to be a limited time that you're going to be able to acquire this champion. Outside of that, though, in terms of like being able to boost her up and make her even more stronger, my understanding is that Elder Scarred, or Scarag, I'm not entirely sure I'm saying his name correctly, correctly, is going to be the champion that you're going to be able to use to empower her. So Elder Skarg is going to be the character that you can inject into empowerment to bring up Xena to make her even more formidable in wherever you decide to use her. So very, very potent chance, very, very strong champion to maybe invest in towards. I feel like if I was to compare Elder versus Xena in terms of viability right now, I'm much more excited about using Xena than I am Elder. So that may be worth the nod if you have access to that champion and you're not using him for anything. He's a Vault Guardian for you. Then maybe you can empower Xena and make her even stronger. So that's something to look forward to. Now, I won't lie. What are my thoughts on it so far? I think there's a lot of promising potential. I think if there's consistency with being able to manage the weak hit and turning it into a normal, strong, or critical hit would be very, very ideal. That makes her a champion that is plug and play into any type of scenario in terms of composition versus composition when it comes to arena. I definitely think that events and targets are areas where you can scale off of her passive are going to be very ideal for her as well. So think about Hydra and Demon Lord, for example. I think those are like 3 key areas that I could see being very, very prominent for her. So definitely something to consider. You can also go a little bit more aggressive with it too. I mean, if her multipliers and her damage is significant enough, she does have 2 AoEs, which could make her very prominent if you build her the right way with the right amount of speed or the right amount of effort. You can make her a campaign farmer if you wanted to, or you can help her, you know, have her help you progress maybe in optimizing your teams a little bit more faster in some of your dungeon grinds. Who knows? You know, the opportunities are endless. How do you feel? I do think that, like, as a barbarian champion, are we really struggling for a lot of, like, attack type champions or, like, nukers in general? I think the answer kind of leans a little bit towards yes, because I know we have Torval, but he's more so a single target. We do have Yakarl, but I kind of view Yakarl as more of, like, a utility style champion, where you can get damage out of him for sure, but his true power, his true essence comes out of his freeze and his ability to control the enemy wave or the enemy team that you're going against. There is Chronum, but I feel like Chronum's also more utility-based based on the fact that you can do AoE HP burns, so maybe not so much. Nobody's really scared or excited about seeing Rorik in action in terms of, like, his damage potential. He does have an ignore 50% target, but, you know, not having that level of consistency like maybe Xena has, maybe something that would be a driving conversation. So this does make someone like Xena a lot more desirable, especially if you're progressing through faction wars. This will be a strong champion that'll help you get through those waves a lot more factored because she's packing a punch. And just being able to be a dominant force in the areas that she's relevant is going to be really, really good. So let me know what you guys think. Are you excited for this event that's going to be coming out? What do you guys think we're going to see in terms of this champion? Are we looking forward to seeing her do work for Arena? Do you think she's going to be dead on arrival? How do you guys feel? Let me know. And with all that being said, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and always remember, stay ascended.
Got the